Guys, today we're actually going to be talking a little bit about equipment. This equipment you actually need to be familiar with when we're in the lab room. So let's go ahead and begin. The first thing you need to be able to use and be able to identify is a beaker. And beakers are used to mix, you use them to measure and heat liquids. You would heat this on a hot plate, but they're not designed for accurate measurement. You can see on the side there that this is a 1500 milliliter beaker, but you're not going to use it for accurate measurement. We'll talk about what you use for that. This glassware, remember, is made up of Chemex or Pyrex because it can withstand heat. The next thing we're going to talk about is an Erlenmeyer flask. This is actually named after a scientist, his last name, and it's used to measure liquid, and it helps prevent liquids from splashing or giving off fumes. If you look at the shape of it, it's a type of flask that has a flat bottom, a conical body, and then a cylindrical neck. And these flasks work really well with volatile liquids. That means these liquids evaporate quickly. Because you have a narrow neck, you have less surface area exposed, and so the liquid will evaporate less quickly. So we'll often use this when we work with liquids like that. A funnel, you're all familiar with a funnel. This is equipment that is used in the lab to target any liquids into any container so they don't get lost or spilled. Certainly easy to use. Test tubes are used to mix, measure, and heat liquids. If you look at them though, they don't have accurate lines for measurement. So you're going to again use something else to measure the liquid. It's only used for approximate measurements. You might use a test tube for heating things, mixing things, for a number of different reasons. Test tube rack, obviously this will hold your test tubes when you're not using them or while you're waiting for a reaction to occur. Sometimes you'll heat up a test tube, and then you're going to put in the test tube rack to watch the reaction. You have tongs and test tube clamps. Tongs are used to grasp heated materials. If you look at the rubber on the end here, obviously you'll use those for beakers and glasses like that. Whereas a test tube clamp, you're going to use just for a test tube. You can see on the end where it holds a test tube, you actually pinch the test tube clamp to open it and then release it to actually grab onto the test tube. Again, you'll use that test tube clamp to actually heat a test tube up over a flame on the Bunsen burner. Thermometers, you're obviously all familiar with thermometers. We don't have any thermometers that measure in Kelvin, but we do have thermometers in our lab room that measure in degrees Celsius and Fahrenheit. If you happen to want to see if a glassware is actually hot without using a thermometer, one of the ways we suggest doing this is by using the back of your hand. Don't actually touch the glass, but you'll actually be able to feel the heat. If you think about the palm of your hand, you have less sensory there, and you're likely to actually grab the glass if it's hot. So use the back of your hand to see if something is warm. These are Petri dishes. I'm really excited when we get to our bacteria unit because we use Petri dishes to grow bacteria and other microorganisms. So what we'll make is something called agar. You can see in that picture off to the right that yellow stuff is actually the agar, and the bacteria is the green on top of it. Looks like there might be a little bit of a mold there too. But agar is just gelatin, which is like a jello, and then beef broth. And the bacteria uses the beef broth to feed off of, so you can actually grow bacteria. So we'll grow our own bacteria when we get to our bacteria unit. Graduated cylinder, this is what you're going to actually use for accurate measurement when you're measuring liquids. You can see the small numbers there measuring in milliliters. A meniscus is the curve of the liquid at its surface. This is how you measure it. So if you look off to the right, we have 51 to 53 milliliters. So you look at the bottom of that meniscus, or the bottom of that curve. And the bottom of the curve, you can see it's concave. That's because the water, those particles are strongly attracted to the container rather than to each other. So you can see how it kind of climbs the side of the wall or side of the glass there. So always measure using the meniscus. Remember that word. Hot plates and burners. A hot plate is electrical. You plug it in. This is what you're going to use to actually heat a beaker or an Erlenmeyer flask. A Bunsen burner, you can see you have gas provided there, and you light it so you have a flame. This is something you would use to actually heat a test tube. You can also heat test tubes by putting it in a water into a beaker filled with water and heating it on the actual hot plate. We'll do a couple of these things. A watch glass, what you're going to use a watch glass for is just to actually measure solids when being weighed or transported. You actually put the watch glass on the scale, zero the scale, and then measure your substance, and then reweigh it so you can get an accurate measure of the substance. Sometimes these watch glasses are used to cover beakers to prevent dust or other particles getting into the beaker, but we won't use those often. These are stoppers, rubber stoppers, and then these come in a lot of different sizes. They can have holes in them, as this one does for thermometers and other probes, but this prevents gases and liquids from escaping a container. Stirring glass rod, pretty easy here, just used to stir things. They're typically made of glass. We have a couple other different stirring rods in the lab room though. A ring stand, this is used to hold items being heated. You can see those rings there and the clamps that hold on to those rings. This allows you to actually heat something above a Bunsen burner, which is very practical and nice to use. A micro spatula is just used for moving small amounts of solid from one place to another place. Micro means small. Okay. A mortar and a pestle. Okay. This is equipment that is used to actually crush solids into powders for experiments, usually to better dissolve the solids. So if you think about when you take a piece of candy, put it in your mouth. If you took like a Smartie or something and you sucked on the Smartie, it takes a lot longer to actually break down. But if you chewed on it, you break it into smaller pieces, it's a lot easier to dissolve. So this allows you to crush some of those elements or substances we're going to use so we can actually see a quicker reaction. A pipette, this is used for measuring small amounts of liquid and transferring it from one place to another. Triple beam balance, while we have these, we won't use these a lot. We'll typically use our electronic scales, but they're used to determine the mass of materials. Please make sure you know what mass is. Mass is a measure of matter, and mass always stays the same. So whether you're on Earth, on the moon, or you're out floating in space, matter doesn't change, okay? Because it's what you're made of. It's what makes you up. Weight is a measurement of gravitational force. So weight actually depends on how much gravity is acting on you. You actually weigh less on the moon than you would on the Earth, and you'd actually weigh hardly anything in space. So know the difference between mass and weight. The last one here we have is fume hood. This is used to contain and safely remove gases from the lab. So when we're working with substances that give a lot of fumes off, we're going to have to make sure that the area is strongly ventilated, and that's what a fume hood does. If you have any questions, you guys, please let me know, but make sure that you are reviewing this equipment.